So, welcome to our last in our workshop series. We still have our closing prayer service on Sunday, but this is our last of the workshop series. Um, and last but not least, we, kind of specifically made the decision to have this as kind of as a final workshop because, as many of you might remember, earlier in the summer, CCA released a commitment to anti-racist action. And so we thought that given that commitment and given our desire to take a hard look at what it might mean for CCA to become a more proactively anti-racist organization, that this was an appropriate way to send ourselves forward from our annual gathering and an appropriate way to conclude the annual gathering. So tonight's workshop, with that in mind, is entitled From Ally to Accomplice, Addressing Supremacy in Catholic Identity. So I'd like to take a quick moment to welcome Jennifer Wells and Takeiya Smith. I will let both of them introduce themselves in their own way here in a moment. But before we do that, the one other piece that I'll share, as we typically do, is just a reminder that we're all here to learn, that each of us might be in a different place in our journey toward confronting white supremacy, toward being anti-racist, in that movement from ally to accomplice. So we just want to remember that all of us are learning, and that we display an attitude of openness and understanding and respect that fact, but also respect each other, that we make sure our comments aren't intentionally hurtful, that they aren't intentionally designed to demean or silence somebody else's efforts to learn. So if we could just get a thumbs up to consent to that piece. All right, it sounds great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer and Takeiya.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm Jennifer Wells. I am a senior organizer with a national organization, Community Change Action. But I'm still living here in West Virginia. I'm able to work remotely and virtually and all that we're going through when it comes to this pandemic. And yeah, so that's me. I'll talk a little bit more as we get started, but I want to let Takeiya be able to introduce herself as well.
Hello, thanks everyone who has joined us tonight. I am with our Future West Virginia and with the Young West Virginia Power Building Movement. I work with young people from ages 14 to about 24. Of course, it always grows, but I work to get young people, prepared and developed to become active participants in the systems that impact our everyday lives. So I do that work across the state, and all of my work is through a racial justice lens.
And actually, I'm going to follow up with Takeiya. I didn't really do a very good job of describing the work I do. So I'm a senior organizer. That's my title. But my actual work focus is with community change. I work with a specific team called the Reinvestment Team, and it's looking to undo the harm that's been done economically and politically to marginalized populations in America. And so we work with Black, Brown, and immigrant populations specifically. And I am in particular and specifically work on a team that is supporting Black-led organizing across the country. I focus on the coastal South, so from the Maryland, DC area, all the way down to the coast of Florida. And because I was, let's say, quote unquote, poached from the Our Future West Virginia organization, Community Change is allowing me to still hold West Virginia as a part of my territory. So I still work in racial justice here in this state. So yeah, just again, welcome. Thank you. I am also a lifelong Catholic, born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is well known for having I believe we're on the state side, at least the largest population and community of Black Catholics in particular. And so I am I have been through catechism, all of my confirmations and rites of passage, and I love my faith. I just needed to name that for you guys. I feel like I've come home to a certain degree, and I'm amongst friends. And that in particular is a way that we titled the session "Ally to Accomplice," because what we want to do in the time, understanding that no one can solve this overnight. We cannot solve this in 1 hour. We will not be able to even solve this in a year. It's going to take a long time. We're in a marathon of undoing and unlearning and discerning how to be anti-racist and how to create an equitable and just world. But I understand I'm also coming into a community that while you guys may be at different levels of this, that you all are in some ways trying to work it out. And so there's always an assumption of allyship here. And then what we're going to try to talk and work through tonight is how to deepen that to become what the Black community likes to hear. We're like, sometimes allies and friends can just pat you on your head or pat you on your back and tell you good job, but not actually dig down in the dirt and get down on your level or get down with you and actually do the hard work. And so when we speak in terms of accomplice, it's because that person is going to throw off the cloaks of privilege and throw off the cloaks of comfort, which I know Catholics, we know that well, and actually dig in and get to the work. And so by way of introduction, thank you for being here again. Let's see, what do we have? What do we got going? One thing that I want to do, we wanted to open it up with an icebreaker, because I always believe, as much as folks may like, oh God, somebody's starting off with another question, I believe in bringing joy. We're going to be talking about some heavy stuff. We're going to be digging into some heavy emotions. And Takeiya in particular feels this healing, forgiveness, and grace are always a part of this process. And then joy and embracing joy has to be a part of this process, right? Nobody wants to go into a war where the only thing we're doing is feeling pain. And so to build a little trust, to loosen us up a little bit before we dig in, I'd like to ask everybody in the chat, if you're able to do it in the chat. If you're not able to do it in the chat, I don't mind you unmuting and popcorning out. There are moments when I just need to get inspired and I just need to get some energy injected, and I do that with music. And so I am going to ask folks, if you can, and you're willing, name a song that just brings you joy. Like when you hear the first chords of this song opening up, you're like, yes. Either you get out on the dance floor or you start singing along or you hum with it. Whatever kind of infuses a little bit of motion, a lighter mood, just enlightening to you. And so I will start. Now, I love music. I believe I would have what is called eclectic taste. I go all over the place. Currently, I will not lie, I'm on the pop side of things that get me energized. And so Beyonce's Black is King album is giving me nothing but life, and My Power is one of the songs on that album. And I just realized it was my song a couple of days ago while I was doing the dishes, and I wasn't really feeling doing the dishes. And that song came on, and all of a sudden the dishes were done. And so I'm like, okay, you're my new favorite song. I'm pinning you. Whenever I need to get motivated to do something, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And I'm loving it. Takeiya is like, isn't she lovely? Jim, could you say that one for me? If you don't mind unmuting yourself, I don't want to murder that name. Is it Asha Khan Farewell? Balance. Thank you, Catherine.
Sorry, Ashokan Farewell.
See, I knew I wasn't going to get it right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Mary, do you want to come in with your song?
Caminemos con Jesus.
Ooh, it's beautiful. I love that. I'm loving this. Thank you. I can do this hard thing. Wildest dreams. I'm loving this. And here's what you guys have also done. You've created your own playlist, which is something me and my team like to do. Go ahead now, Born to Run. I see you, Ed. I see you. Anything by Neil Diamond, Paper Planes, MIA. Go ahead, Casey. Jump by Van Halen. Oh, so send out some healing vibes. Heard the bad news last night of him transitioning.
Yeah, Bob came up with Raindrops.
Raindrops
falling on my head.
Oh, I love that song too. I do too. Oh my gosh, yes. Joy to the World by Three Dog Night. We got some good people here. Like, your songs are energizing me just reading them. I can't wait. I know this is being recorded, so I know you can also download this chat at some point, Ed or Molly. I might like to see this like on my Spotify at some point. I'm just naming that.
Yeah.
Just gonna name
The
that.
CCA playlist.
So thank you. I hope that brought a smile to your face as we did that. I'd also ask, because I know we've talked a lot about the electronic side of things, if folks are like me and we like to be low tech as all get up, I will walk you through the low tech side of life. And so if you just want to have a piece of paper or something to write with as a utensil as we walk through this moment together, for the space that's going to be actually kind of projected on the screen at some point when we're doing the worksheet and the exercises that we're going to be walking into, I'll name that. So if you want to just write it out at some point, we can do it that way as well. So if folks need to grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, know that this is your moment to do such. I welcome it. And yeah, we're going to get started. So the first item on our agenda, I think we're going to shift it over to Takeiya. You're going to take on this piece, correct? Cool.
I am. I'm muted, but you know me well, so I feel like you heard me anyway.
I know you did.
Okay. So like Jennifer has said, and I think it's something that we all know, is that this anti-racism work is not something that can be accomplished overnight. And we know that and we say that, but tonight I wanted us to have a breakdown of what exactly that looks like. So what does the process of becoming anti-racist look like for us as individuals, in the church, and in your purpose? And that's what we in the community as well, and that's what we're going to go through right now. So I thought this was really good and how it broke it down. And so let's go through the first layer, and let's look at what the fear zone looks like, which is a totally normal response to this man-made thing called racism, even when you want to be on the right side of the line. So let's look at what some of those things can look like. I deny racism is a problem. I avoid hard questions. I strive to be comfortable. I talk to others who look and think like me. Now, I know we all talk to others who look and think like us, but you know, I think it's worth questioning at what point could your perspective be broadened by stepping outside of that and examining why is that? Is that out of convenience? Is that out of fear? Habit, normalcy? So yes, that is the fear zone. You can, if anyone wants to be brave enough or vulnerable enough to identify with some of these things as we go through the layers, we'll get into deeper discussion later, but you can raise your hand if you have at one point experienced some of the things in the fear zone of becoming anti-racist. I will start. Of course, I know I have, even in my own journey of making sure my actions and my work are intentionally anti-racist. You know, it's harder to be outside of your comfort zone for sure. And because it's controversial at times, and it's just easier to not have conflict. And sometimes I have feared, how will this conflict or bringing up this uncomfortable subject matter affect me in many areas, in different areas of my life. So now the learning zone. I recognize racism is a present and current problem. I seek out questions that make me uncomfortable. I understand my own privilege in ignoring racism. I educate. I I educate myself about race and structural racism. I am vulnerable about my own biases and knowledge and acknowledge gaps. And knowledge gaps. I listen to others who think and feel, who think and look differently than me. There's a lot there. Does that spark any thoughts for anyone, whether it's you individually or just thoughts in general about some of these elements of, recognizing that racism is a current and present problem, seeking out questions that are uncomfortable, understanding our own privilege, and each one of us, myself, all of us carry privilege in one way or another.
I'll step in for a second, Takeiya, and just reiterate the point of the part about the learning zone, like what's there. And I often hear this in informal conversations, not necessarily in learning moments per se, of this being like the awareness zone, right? You always know that you should be aware of a problem. Like you become aware that it exists, that it's not good, that it's bad, that it doesn't feel right. And a lot of folks may stop there. And that's the part where we really have questions and we really want to dig deeper. For the folks that become aware that racism is a thing, they feel it, they see it, they sense it, whether it be in their church community, whether they feel it in the church as a whole, we'll just name that, in the CCA itself, where you may be in a situation where you're like, this conversation just doesn't feel right. And you then walk back and acknowledge after some reflection that, no, you know where, I think that came from a privileged perspective. I think that came from a racist perspective. I've been aware. The question always is, then what? And I saw that we have somebody that raised their hand. Is it Joan?
That's
Joan?
right. And
yes.
Something came up when you were talking, Jennifer, for me, and that was, I remember being uncomfortable with the term white supremacy at some point. And then also when I was asked in a training one time what my racial identity was, I was really uncomfortable saying I was white. And I think at some point I realized some of that had to do with shame and guilt and recognizing, how I've been socialized, and also had to do with just the fact that I think for me growing up, I think this is probably not uncommon, but the term racism, I think somehow because white becomes the norm for white people, we think we're just the normal people, and that race doesn't exist unless there's people of color around, and we're just like the whatever. So we don't recognize that. So that was just some of the uncomfortable stuff that happened for me along the way. I wanted to share that.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you greatly for sharing that. And there is so much truth, and particularly, I want to name what you and uplift what you just said. In West Virginia, I'm not originally from West Virginia, so I came from a largely Black population, a largely Black community. And since I've been in West Virginia for the last 15 years and have conversations in multiracial groups, I've heard from other white people that are saying, well, my community wasn't diverse, so I didn't have to learn these things. And that's that part of the growth section, that's no longer a place to hide. And there's no blame there for the moment, right? Like acknowledging that and understanding that, but that is such an area of learning and unlearning to a certain degree that, yeah, racism can exist in a completely all white community. Actually, the question should be, why is the community all white? Like, why hasn't there been any diversity? And there's so many layers to unpack if you're looking at an all white community. I'm going a little bit off rails. I'm sorry, a little bit, Takeiya, for what I'm doing, but I have been digging deeper and deeper into how institutionalized racism is. I'm a Black woman in America. I've lived as a Black woman my whole entire life. I've experienced racism since a child, a baby. I think every Black person has had in America has had the conversation, when did you first experience racism? And I think I can honestly say it was probably about 3. It's a memory that still sticks with me. But the fact of the matter that the institution and laws and policies reinforced behaviors, reinforced mindsets, and reinforced thinking. That's why it's going to be such a marathon for us to get past, and not to get past, actually to get through and work through and learn anti-racist behaviors. When I'm reading right now a book, and we'll send a whole list of resources for you all that you can tap into, read more, learn more. Reading about sundown towns and how those policies were enlisted, and just in the beginning chapters, explaining that if you are sitting in an all-white community, that in fact is not a natural thing for America to have, and that if it has indeed been that way for generations, there are some really deep-seated questions that need to be lifted up. And I see that we have several more hands going up. And so I think Kathleen, I saw your hand after Jones, and then I see you, Carol. And yeah, I think, yeah. So Kathleen and then Carol.
But I see myself going, I'm definitely in a learning zone and growth. But I know it's still, I still sometimes avoid the hard questions because I feel like I really don't know. I'm not in your skin, so the white privilege has made me so much more aware of how much further I need to go as an individual. Things that I say, things that I do, just the whole respect for people who are a different color, people who have no gender, people who are LGBTQ, just trying to get into their skin, and trying to understand. I don't think I'll ever totally understand, because here I am 69 years old, but I know that racism is a present and current problem, and it has been a problem for like ever. And so living in Eastern Kentucky, in Floyd County, we have a small mulatto community, and we also have a Black African-American community in Wheelwright that was settled to work in the mines and stuff. So anyways, I'm just much more aware now of how much more I need to learn. So for me, it's a whole education, that learning zone, and I can go from the fear zone to the growth zone, back to the learning zone, and but I'm willing to do it. I want to do it. It's a desire. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you. I'm gonna hit you, Carol. Now you've had your hand up for a little bit.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. This is kind of a good follow-up to what Kathleen just said. As far as white privilege and feeling that discomfort and learning from the discomfort, I was at a anti-racism training, and one of the presenters said, okay, white people in the room, what do you like about being white? And we all just kind of sat there and went, what? What do you mean like about being white? What's there to like? We just are white, what's there to like about that? And nobody really said anything. And the people of color just sort of rolling their eyes. And the presenter said, okay, people of color in the room, help them out. And so it just started flying like popcorn. You like being able to drive up to any motel that you want and go in and ask for a room and not worry about how you're going to have to be treated. You like walking around in a store without somebody following you around like they think you're going to steal something. And just all of these things came flying out. And yeah, it was really uncomfortable, but how enlightening to hear these things that we just kind of grew up thinking were normal. And, well, what do you mean that's because I'm white? But yeah, it is. And learning that and hearing all those things was confounding. And I know that something changed in me in that moment, that it was like, whoa, yeah, I'm beginning to get this now. So just to share that experience, that was transformative thing for me.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for sharing with us. Takeiya, before I hand it over to you, I was told in chat that Bob has had his hand raised or would like to make a comment as well.
Absolutely.
And then I'll toss it back to you. Bob, you're up.
Yes, yeah. This isn't Bob. This is Irma.
Hi, Irma.
I wanted to share something. I think I grew up being told I was Spanish. I was raised in San Diego, and I can remember seeing the Mexican kids that were kind of put off to the side. But I was Spanish, so I was safe. And it didn't really occur to me. I didn't have problems with discrimination growing up. And then one day, my kids were all small, so I might have been in my 30s, 40s, where I was asked to be one of 4 members in a discussion panel. And the book we were discussing was Eric Fromm's The Art of Loving. So I'm reading this book, and I cannot remember what it is that I've read. But all of a sudden, I was furious. And I think what it told me, so I went to talk to my chaplain, Father Davis, and I said, there's no way that I can be on this panel. And
take your time, Irma.
And what I told him is that this reading, whatever section it was in the book, let me see how I had to deny who I was in order to fit in. And there was a real anger and not being just accepted for who I was, that I had to pretend to be, quote, Spanish because I was, well, I'm olive complected, so it wasn't that I was anything else other than whatever. But and I never had, but my children have suffered discrimination because we went into a neighborhood, we moved into a neighborhood, built our house there. And when I had gone into therapy, they said, "Oh my God, didn't you know that that this is a redneck area?" And I said, "No." So they suffered a lot of discrimination, and they were bright, they were athletic, and our son finally, our number 2 son finally, at one time told me he had to go to Stanford. He was in pre-med. He's an emergency room doctor, but he said, I had to go to Stanford. And, my friends then were Black and Jewish and this and that and the other, until I finally felt okay about myself.
I want to say thank you for being vulnerable, and it's just, when we look back at how we all have different sources of pain, when we're examining how racism has touched our lives, and it's super raw at times, and to even get to that place of acknowledgement, I think is like you stepping in to your identity in a way that you felt like you could not, at one time. and that is super brave and unapologetic. And Jennifer knows we've spoken about this, and to be anti-racist, and to push against anti-Black racism, xenophobia of any kind. You cannot do that without acknowledging who you are to race and how you function through the world and how it's affected you. And so it's extremely important. So I appreciate you expressing that.
Awesome.
So I want us to get to the third layer, and I appreciate all the grace that's being given right now with being able to share. I'm going to get into the third layer, and then we're going to move to the next part, and we're going to be able to share even more. So, and Molly, is it possible for you to zoom in for me to see the first half, the top half? So in the growth zone. So I sit with my discomfort. I speak out when I see racism in action, and I'll go to the bottom half, and then I'll pass it back to you, Jennifer. I educate my peers on how racism harms our profession. I don't let mistakes deter me from being better. I yield positions of power to those otherwise marginalized. So that is the growth zone, and we'll get into more of that in our next step.
Thanks, Takeiya. And what I'd like to say about this diagram, which means when I first saw it, it like just spoke so much to me. And even though as you see the diagram, and by the way, we're going to share this with you after the session, so you can have this to hold and to study a little bit more, is you see a linear line, right? You see the line coming out of the fear zone, walking into the learning zone, going into the growth zone. And thanks to Irma and everyone else who shared vulnerable pieces of themselves, we heard in Irma's voice the human side of why we need to be in the growth zone, why there is so much work that needs to be done, and why we should be leaning into it and embracing it. But we also have to acknowledge that it's difficult, right? This is not easy. And while the line goes from fear to learning to growth, here's what I'm probably going to tell you. I'm going to tell you it's probably going to happen. You may get to a moment right now, we are in a heightened state in this country where racism is like finally getting a huge spotlight. And there seems to be an urge and an urgency even to want to work through what we've let go stagnant for centuries, for generations in this country. And that in part is propelling people to want to learn and to become aware and to hopefully want to grow. But I can tell you, there's a fear from me, at least in the Black community, and perhaps Takeiya can back me, and even Irma, you might feel this. Our biggest fear is that this moment will pass, that folks who are typically comfortable, who live in a world where you don't have to worry about how you buy your house or how you get your job, or even for me and my husband, whether you'll be served or not at restaurants that you walk into, which that has happened in the last couple of years. We have not been served. That when this heightened state that we're in, that is even embraced around this electoral cycle, passes, that all of the concern and all of the work will start to subside. And that is the fear that, folks, you can be in the growth zone and bounce back to the learning zone, because it may get a little too uncomfortable in the growth zone. And there may be too many questions and too many hard and difficult conversations. And if you don't have to face these things every day because of the skin you walk in or the gender that you are, then it might be easy to fall back into the learning zone. And if you're in the learning zone, you could even revert back into the fear zone, because I'm going to say battling racism, battling white supremacy is not an easy path. And it's not an easy way, and it's going to get nasty, and it's going to be painful, not only in the uncovering of as an individual, but the institutional work that has to happen. And right now we're holding this for this moment tonight with each other, because there's so much work that needs to happen in the church. There's so much work that needs to happen in local churches and in the dioceses. There's so much power that is centered in the hands of people that are probably still hovering in a fear zone, certainly maybe halfway in the learning zone, but I'm going to say there's very few of us that are in the growth zone, because in the growth zone, there's going to be diminishing of power, if we are truly being uncomfortable, if we're truly leaning in to equity, to calling out bad policies, what we're also going to be asking folks is that if you have the power, you're going to have to share it. And no one yields power without a fight. And so that's just something we have to understand, have to not necessarily be comfortable with, because there's always going to be, we're human beings. We're always going to be a little bit nervous about the challenge, but that we have to have some sort of commitment to continuing. And so then that brings us to the next part of our presentation. One of the things I wanted you guys to sit in, and I think you can do this on your own. I think I'm in a thoughtful group. I'm in a really good group. So I feel this work can be done without us, myself or Takeiya being in leadership or facilitating, is to take this diagram, to take this work, the fear, the learning, the growth, and to identify in all honesty where you land and how much more work you need to do. Because that's the thing. Anti-racism is, again, not going to just happen to us. We're going to have to actually work for it. We're going to have to work to become it. We're going to have to push others around us to become it. And so thinking about yourself, thinking about your local community and the church that you live, because our surroundings and our environment feed us, they fuel us. If we're in a society or in a community, in an environment that encourages us to just stay in the learning zone and not push it very hard, or if we do push it too hard, it's going to get nasty. My neighbors may not like me. Folks in my work may not like me. My priest may not welcome me or like me. If we're having that, we're going to stay. I mean, comfort is comfort. I can tell you, I like to be comfortable. But this is not, I don't have a choice in some cases. Some cases I'm not allowed comfort. And it's because of that I fight. And so I say that is in your moments, take back, reflect, and meditate. Honestly, again, of where you are, where your community is, where your church is, and then most importantly, where this group, the CCA, is, and where it should be. So then that brings me to the next section. And again, this is going to be work. Takeiya and I said this when we were trying to frame this whole workshop out, is like, we can't teach people to be anti-racist. You have to, that's honestly something, there's information you can absorb, but you have to really unlearn and teach yourself. And so all of that starts with work, and we wanted to model out what it's going to be like to work. Again, it's not going to always be easy. And so one practice that we're going to explain in our next section. And Molly, I think we can bring down, if we can, the anti-racism diagram. And I'm going to talk through for folks what we're going to step into next, which is called the immunity to change exercise. And it is an exercise that I encountered in a leadership development cohort. It wasn't completely not about race. Because in all actuality, my leadership cohort was dedicated and focused on building the leadership of Black and Brown women. So the whole understanding that in order to support, surround, and hold lead organizers in organizations across the country, and women like myself, who at that time was walking into an ED-ship in an executive directorship of a nonprofit in West Virginia, knowing I would be only one of maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 Black women that ran statewide organizations. There was a need for my cohort because in all actuality, everything is dominated by white culture. How we frame our work, how we frame our economy, how we frame how leaders are developed, supported, and built, all have traces of white nationalism and white supremacy etched in like the most subtle ways that when folks are benefiting from it, it may not seem obvious to them, but for those of us that are on the other side, it's quite clear we don't belong. Something always knocks up against our sensibilities. Like, I think Irma felt it when she talked about how she had to walk through school and deny her identity. And so that's a daily experience. That's a daily experience for me. And so in this leadership cohort, one of the things that they asked us, and why I'm bringing it here tonight, was it was so powerful for me as they walked me through ways in which I wasn't leaning into my best powers, my best leadership skills, and asking me why. If I was aware that these were good things, why was I not leaning into them? Why weren't I supporting them more, learning more about myself in that realm, so that that would be the leading skill or the leading power that I exuded out to the world? And I often then thought back again on conversations that I've had about race and racism. And that the minute that a Black person or a person of color, particularly a woman, brings this conversation into the room or sets it on the table, naturally folks get defensive. no one wants to believe themselves to be the racist in the room. No one wants to believe that they would intentionally lean into a system that deprived or denied someone. And so when it's brought up that we want to have a conversation, that uncomfortable moment, right? Folks tend to put their guard up. I was a child accused by my mother of doing something bad. The first thing I always did was put my guard up and try to deny that it was even me that did it, even in some cases knowing full well that I had done it. And so in order to have a good structured conversation around how to honestly become anti-racist, I thought that this tool was a beautiful way for us to start. And so it's two Harvard psychologists, completely not thinking, I think, at this point about racism, but really talking about leadership, framed out how we as individuals function when it comes to transformative change. We talk about that a lot in the nonprofit world. We want transformative change in policies. We want transformative change in laws. If we're talking about an equitable and anti-racist America, that is going to be hugely transformative, correct? Well, guess what? As human beings, we don't run to change. Our immune systems, our defense mechanisms, things that have kept us alive and have allowed us to survive to this point have often been because we push change away. Not because necessarily we don't want the change, but if it threatens our being, we're not going to naturally absorb it. And so that's why this tool is actually called the immunity to change. And what it wants you to do is to dig a little bit deeper to find out. You may have the loftiest of goals, you have the best of intentions, but if you aren't actively committed to meeting that goal and everything that it requires, then in all actuality, how committed are you to that goal? Is it just doublespeak? Is it just lip service? And so first I want to walk through the columns of the tool so that you get a better understanding of what you're supposed to be putting there. And then in the time that we have, if folks are willing to hang in there with us for a little bit, we want to break up for a couple of minutes in smaller groups. And the focus is not necessarily going to be on you as an individual. We have the becoming anti-racism tool and diagram. I want you to reflect and meditate on that on your own at another time. But for this moment, for the moment that we're going to hold for the time that we're together, I want you to really consider what is it like for the CCA as a collective to really challenge, to go from the fear zone. If you identify yourself already in the learning zone, what does the CCA really need to do as a collective to move into the growth zone? Because that's your ultimate goal, right? To be in the growth zone, to be able to challenge, to be able to unlearn, to be able to be just. So the immunity change tool works like this. The first column that you're going to have, we're going to start from the left side. So if you're writing this down, this is my low-tech way of helping you. From the left side, the column would be your goal, right? And what we ask when you think of your goal is think of something that is going to have a huge payoff, right? We're not talking about small goals. We're not talking, well, for me, a small goal would be considered losing 10 pounds, but actually it's become a very lofty goal with the pandemic. But really thinking about pushing yourself to something big and bold. When we're thinking about an anti-racism in our church, when we're thinking of eliminating white supremacy in our church, our home church, our diocese, that's pretty big. It's going to take a lot of work. But is it something you really want? So as a CCA, is an equitable, anti-racist world what you're aiming for? That's a pretty lofty goal. So make certain the goal is lofty. That's the first challenge. In your second column, it is, what do you actually do? So if we're looking at our goal, we're saying we want an anti-racist, equitable world, what are we doing currently that is actually preventing that from happening? Are we not in the growth zone? Are we kind of in purgatory in that learning zone? Think about it. As a collective, again, we're thinking more in the CCA and not as an individual. So think about the church. Think about what the church actually does. In some cases, maybe just using this as an example, we really want you to think about this and dig into it in your smaller groups. It may be, and forgive me for this, the thoughts and prayers we often say right after our major tragedy, right? the fact that there's a massive gun or shooting at a school, and the first thing, of course, we want to hold the folks that are impacted by this in prayer, but oftentimes that has become the answer instead of finding the actual solution that would stop the shooting from happening. And that solution doesn't have to be a cookie cutter, right? It doesn't necessarily mean we take guns away from people, but there has to be a solution in and above our prayers that actually get it done. But if we stop with just praying and we do no more action, do we really want a non-massacre, right? We don't want to have a safe school. We want to have a school free of violence. Are we really working to that if that's where we stop? So the second column is thinking about what you actually do. Do you actually hold the behaviors, hold the mindset, hold the actions that would create that lofty goal? So then we move to column 3. Why do you do what you do in column 2? Because you see, you don't do what you do in column 2 for no reason. That's typically what you do in column 2 that's preventing you from reaching your big goal. Is probably the fear zone. There's something about what you're doing in column 2 that holds you, right? And there's a reason. There's a reason why you do it. And the reason is what we want to uncover in column 3. And what we call column 3 is your competing commitment. You say you want a just and anti-racist world, but you find yourself doing things that won't quite get you there. Why? Whatever it is that stops you from getting there, that's actually the thing that you're most committed to. That's actually where you're doing most of your work. And that commitment is actually going to compete with you achieving the goal. So that's column 3. In column 4 is your big assumption. There's a reason you commit to what you do in column 3. There is something about facing the world, not doing what you do in column 3 that scares you. So the big assumption, and I'll make it a more individual example to make it a little bit clearer. I say I want to write books. That's a goal. I want to write a book. I never find the time. I do everything in the world. I write on social media. I write lovely posts on Facebook, but that's not that book. Why do I just write on social media and I don't actually commit myself to writing that book that I promised myself I wanted to do since I was in 6th grade, since Sister Helen told me I was a good writer? The big assumption that I have that stops me from doing the thing I want to do the most is my fear of not appearing creative or bright, smart enough, good enough. So I commit myself more to hiding what I feel are my insecurities. I spend more energy there than I do achieving the goal that I've stated for myself. And I gave you that example so that you'd be able to work it a little bit clearer. And if folks have questions, please feel free to stop me and ask me before we split you up I'm going to give you about 5 to 6 minutes in small group because I know we're getting close to time. And I'm thanking you guys for sticking with us this long. But when you're in the small group, I really want you to think about this in the sense of the CCA and becoming equitable, more importantly, moving into the growth zone of becoming anti-racist. It's really a goal. Where are we putting our energy? Where could we be doing more? What could we be unlearning? What do we have to uncover about ourselves that would help us unlearn? There's a whole process to this. And then this is just the first moment to do this exercise. What I would recommend, because it is deep, it's a lot deeper than an hour workshop would allow you, is actually spend time on your own and then spend time together talking through what are the competing commitments. That's really what you want to identify. Where are you most comfortable placing the energy and your time, and then finding out why. That's how you move from the fear zone to learning. And that's eventually how you're going to move from the learning zone into growth. as folks are coming back, welcome back from your small groups. I want to know how that exercise felt for you. If for folks that are going to be reporting back, I want to know how far you were able to get, or like for us, I think Bob, Irma, for our little group, Joanne, I felt the enormity of it kind of set on my shoulders when we tried to dissect it into the columns. So whoever was chosen as the report back, I'd love to hear a few nuggets from your time together.
I can report from group 3, if that's fine.
That's good.
Yeah, so I mean, it was short and we kind of felt rushed. I know for me personally, I said to the group that I felt really pretty intense feelings as I went through it just before we got together, and I was like, this is bigger than I was ready for. So we've all zeroed in on kind of what our what the second column is. I'm not looking at the columns right now, but the second column, and we said one person brought up the wanting to be nice, so not being willing to confront racism when it's kind of obviously right before us, because we work so hard to find a delicate, gentle, nice way to approach it. And so we are prioritizing being nice and putting this value on kind of a certain kind of, when it isn't nice to accept, to not fight racism, right? Like that niceness. And so we talked about how like we end up kind of facing with I don't know how to do this, because we don't want that uncomfortable situation, instead of what you reflected, like for you and others, like you can't be in that position. So we're taking this privilege of being able to prioritize our comfort, that we want to do it nicely. And that was kind of where that was our stopping point. We just didn't get past that.
I hear you. Thank you, Molly. This isn't a question for the group to answer, just something that I think should be put out on the table and pondered. And it's the sense that to be on the receiving end of racism is to be on the receiving end of immense cruelty. That is not pretty, that is vicious, that is murderous, that actually ends in death for some folks.
Jennifer, I didn't hear that one word that you said.
Oh.
Go back just about one sentence.
Okay, so putting the question on the table for those that are on the receiving end of racism, understanding that it can end in death for some, that it is the ugliest thing, but that it is one of the few things that, as Molly said, and I know because in order to survive as a Black woman in America, as a Black community, we often have to be nice just to get out of the situation that is racially motivated, that could end in our death. Like survival becomes the number one thing for us. And so we won't push a difficult confrontation or a conversation that is obviously wrong, because if we do it, it's almost, you're sealing your fate. Like you're gonna die, you're probably gonna be killed. And it's with that, I'm saying it's not for us to answer, but just sitting it on the table, understand that is what we are being nice about, right? When we say we don't want to be comfortable, and I'm not, again, this is not blame, this is just reality, that when we try to make the room feel okay, that more than likely, it is not because on the other side of you not being okay is immense, immortal danger. It is upsetting the feelings of someone else. So I'm just wanting to lay that there, because there's so much truth in that. And I also want you to know that if you're in the company, the mixed company of other Black and brown people, and you see them mirroring the same behavior, it is not because honestly they don't want to scream, fight, tear the walls down, dismantle everything to rebuild it. It's because they probably are in fear. Right? There's probably mortal danger there. And that's why we need accomplices and folks that are willing to ride with us and folks that are willing to throw down with us, because I still see Jesus upturning the table. That was not a good look for him. He probably did not win many friends when he did that. But that's the Jesus that I hold dear. But I thank you, Molly. There's so much truth and so much gravity in acknowledging that piece. Anyone else? Report back.
I can do, I think we were group 2. I'm not sure.
It's okay.
But I think we spent most of our time just in the first column and the improvement goal and the challenges, what we need to do differently. I think I told them this was my first year being involved with the gathering, and that I was impressed that we did have speakers from the LGBTQ community. We had people speak about Native American experience and African American experience. So I was impressed with at least that part of the gathering. But one of the things we talked about as necessary, or that would be helpful, would be to recruit a more diverse community, and how you do that, and just acknowledge the challenge that in the title we're the Catholic, Catholic, and in many places in Appalachia, the African American community is very small anyway. And then when you get into Catholic African Americans, you're just talking about so few people. But we talked about the including Filipino communities and Native American communities, and Latino communities, that there are communities that exist that could be drawn in. I think that's most of what we covered.
Anyone else? And Casey, please know that I saw your comment. I want to wait for other folks to report back, and then I want to circle back to you.
And I'll say, I think Casey was in our group, so I think she's nuancing what I had said too.
Mm-hmm.
I can share from group 1. We had kind of a lot of goals broadly addressing systemic racism in Appalachia. Like in general, we acknowledged all of us are new to CCA. And so to talk concretely about the organization was difficult. Another goal was making the groups that we're a part of more integrated. And we kind of talked a little bit about there's this impulse to ask people of color to join us. And instead, maybe it should be going to be in spaces where we can, be in more integrated spaces, so that is a more natural, there's a relationship there that then our spaces become less segregated in that sense. Talked about Brian Stevenson talks about getting proximate, right, with one another, and the importance of that. And then also the goal of being actively anti-racist, not just sort of not being racist, but taking that active step, which is kind of the diagram we looked at. Behaviors that kind of go against some of those goals were, among all the issues that we're trying to work on, like not prioritizing racism as like the central one, and kind of letting our, sort of all the competing priorities take us in different directions, instead of being able to commit like time and energy to consistent work on racism. Another one was just like continuing to exist in segregated spaces. And another one was not speaking up. Some of the hidden commitments that were with those was keeping the peace, protecting relationships that are valued. I think another one was for me, like getting it wrong, trying to get involved, getting halfway in and realizing, oh, I made a mistake, or I'm the person that I'm following that I think they made a mistake on the strategy, on the way. This is, getting it wrong, I guess. And then the assumptions were like relationships will suffer. And I guess this other terrible one that I realize, and I'm speaking personally now, is like, we can't get this right unless we're all spiritual gurus. And so like you know what I mean? And thinking that leads to despair. If there's this assumption that can't get it right unless we're all Gandhi, we're never going to get there. And so being able to, chunk away at it, even if we're not Jesus yet. So that was kind of some of what we talked about.
Good stuff. I want to commend y'all. I'm going to say this, name it, lift it. Y'all did a lot in 6 minutes. I just want to say that y'all did a lot in 6 minutes in naming it. I hear in this moment, and Takeiya, please jump in. I hear opportunity. I hear where you say, I haven't been here very long, that you're actually where you need to be, and not being here very long means you have the space to disrupt, right? Because you can, right? You're new. You can even lean back on that newness as your power and not as a weakness, right? I don't know how things have been going for the last however many years, but I'm gonna tell you how I think it should go. I hear there are more numbers on this call, and I'm an organizer, part-time activist, always about a little direct action. And so the organizer in me says that the numbers are more full in this moment with us on this call tonight, that are saying you want to do more, you're still learning, that's okay, you're willing to learn, you're willing to grow, and that you not being in the establishment, even being established CCA, is not anything to use as an excuse, or to say it first as if to say it's a bad thing. I actually see immense opportunity. Obviously, things haven't been the best. I'm just gonna say, obviously, things need to be improved. And here you are, new people, bringing some new growth and some new learning. And so I just want you to lean into that. And I want you to build your numbers. For Casey, I hear you, I see you, I read the comment. I know that space that you're speaking to. Know that you have a community that is willing to step up and step out. You're gonna have to find them though, right? They're not always gonna be the people that are right next to you. The people that are right next to you may not be ready to grow. They may be stuck in the fear zone. You're gonna see that people you love and you care for are not going to willingly want to move. And that's just something you have to accept. But if you are intent and your commitment is moving, then you find that group. You find the numbers, you have the conversations at your church, in your community, on this call, in this regional CCA. You find the folks that you can grow and learn together, and you commit to doing that. Yeah, I hope that helps.
If I could build off something Jennifer is saying, please, real quick, is, for all of you CCA members out there, and especially the new members, and just kind of, Jennifer saying, use that fact that you're new. And one thing I'll say is, and Jeannie says this, Jeannie is one of our co-coordinators, always says, CCA is a member-driven organization. So you all have the power, me as a board member, Jeannie and Michael as the co-coordinators, we follow y'all's lead. I mean, obviously, as long as it's consistent with CCA's mission, which is to be a grassroots prophetic organization for Appalachia and her people, we're going to follow y'all's lead. So these are things that you're passionate about. You want to see CCA doing more. Like Jennifer said, get out there and disrupt, bring it to the organization. I think for me, one thing I've been thinking a lot about is we've been talking about that CCA is a very white organization. I think a big part of it's less about, maybe I'm wrong about this, and Jennifer, Takeiya, correct me if this is the wrong perspective to take, but I think it's less about like recruiting people to be here, but for us to show up in Black spaces, and for us as CCA folks to get involved with Black-led organizations. And I think if we're showing up in those spaces, that we're gonna build allyship. We're gonna become accomplices with folks who are then gonna show up in our spaces as well, because we're gonna build that trust. So I think that's another invitation. Is it's not about like, oh, come join us, but it's like, let us join you, let us help you. How can we be a part of your work? And I don't know. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me. I'm gonna let Takeiya jump in here, because I'm sure she's biting it. She's chomping at the bit. But I just went through for my job, and also just because I wanted the knowledge, I went through a training for a legal observer, and observing how to better take care of folks that are willing to put their bodies on the line to make change. And if folks are willing and able to join that, right? Come and step out of the boundaries of CCA a little bit to get into the plane. You can imagine the community that can be built. I always found the church to be so much more profound out in the streets than I did in the building. And so I often practiced it out there, and that there is a whole community of folks that probably will never take a catechism class and never become Catholic, that you share values with, that you share goals with, that would want to be with you, to be with you in the best of ways, where in some ways your church members are probably not going to even hold you in those ways. But we need you. I'm just going to say that we need you. I think of Martin Luther King's letter to Birmingham, in the Birmingham jail, is one of my favorite pieces by him. And there were priests, there were Catholic priests that were then, and then are still now, that would have told him he had no right to make folks uncomfortable and ask for just fairness. I mean, what he was asking for in Birmingham and Selma and all these places was just basic. It was real basic. But they even said or spoke up or used their power as religious faith leaders to say, we're going to condemn that. That's not good. You need to wait. And then my question is, wait for what? Takeiya, I'll open space for you because I've been hogging it. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I appreciate everyone like just being super vulnerable and really dissecting this, because we know it will continue and go into things and connect to things that are like much deeper and ongoing. And it sounds cheesy, but like this acknowledgement, I will say, acknowledgement is the first step, as long as we're like willing to apply things in our real lives to the entities that we are connected to. So that's just my little tidbit. I've gotten so many good gems from this that have really like grounded me in a way that the busyness, the craziness has distracted me from. So I appreciate you all for that.
Thanks, Jennifer and Takeiya.
Can I say something and interrupt for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead, Irma.
Yeah, it's Bob and Irma Howard, and we're going to be having to leave. I just wanted to say this is one of the best sessions you guys have had. And the presenters are really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irma and Bob, for being so thoughtful and attentive.
And thanks to Jennifer and Takeiya for staying on late with us and giving so much of their evening.
Certainly. So how I like to close is I want to popcorn out. So just unmute yourself and just let it all hang. What, in one word, if you could just put it down into one word, what do you feel? And I will start and say, I am hopeful. I am hopeful. And again, I'm just leaving the floor open so folks can just popcorn out as you unmute yourselves.
Challenged.
That was the word I had also, Jennifer, was hopeful.
Encouraged. Stretched.
Longing.
Energized.
Motivated.
Inspired.
Grounded.
Say it again.
Encouraged.
Like that.
Yeah. Encouraged. That was the word I thought too.
Cool. Jeannie's feeling motivated, she says.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Energized. I'm with you, Jeannie.
Energized, I heard was also my word.
I am so thankful and grateful and appreciative for you holding space with us tonight. And I actually look forward to talking again. So I'm hoping that opportunity will show itself.
Let's make that happen with both you and Takeiya.
Yeah, come back next year.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a beautiful night, you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm doing a crazy thing where I'm waving the Zoom. I'm told that the people are like,
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Molly.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night, all.